now that we've looked at some of the ethical considerations, that is, the arguments in particular in favor of autonomous warfare, let's now consider some of the arguments against autonomous warfare. And there's a number of issues going on here, but I think a couple of concepts that we can, or rubrics that we can put them under, are twofold. One is this notion of moral disengagement, and the other is this notion of diffusion of responsibility. Fancy terms, but they're also related. I think that with moral engagement, or with diffusion of responsibility, you'll get moral disengagement as well. Anyways, let's split them up, have a look at them. Moral disengagement, sometimes referred to as kind of the video gaming of warfare. What does that mean? Well, think about this, and you find this in a lot of science fiction novels, where you know, in the old Star Trek series and lots of works of people fighting with machines and fighting each other with machines. And the idea is that by fighting with machines, what you end up doing is prolonging the war. Wars never end. The damage just keeps going on. And in the sense that the damage, although it's limited to property damage, the war never ends. You create the possibility of endless war. Even if humans happen to be killed or whatnot, the net effect is that there's no real impetus to bring the war to an end. It's just endless retaliations. That's a possibility, and people worry about that. So if you separate people from the battle space so that the fighting is way over there, you can see why it could go on and on and on. Think about how some wars have gone on recently largely because, you know, people have been separated. So this distancing effect, you could argue about certain wars where there hasn't been a draft for the war. It's been going on. And I'm not talking about everybody that's involved in the war. I'm just talking about certain countries that have been involved, and they've distanced their population from it. So, you know, the casualty count is very, you know, relatively low. The population is distanced from it. You know, there's no draft for the war. There's no rationing. So the effects of the war are all, you know, way far away. Well, people get morally disengaged? No, we're fighting that war. I never noticed. So if you get to the point where wars can be fought and people don't really even notice, you get an odd sort of moral disengagement. That the war is just like, yeah, I watch it on TV from time to time. And even people that are involved in the war might be only involved at a distance. And again, it's mediated through technology, through their screens. So it's kind of like war becomes like this video game after a while. And if that happens, then the tolerance for brutality, you know, if you only see it on a screen, might very well increase. And so that what do you get? You get more brutal wars out of it, not less. I mean, but it may not be more brutal for certain individuals, but where the war is actually taking place, that's real war over there, and that could be much more ferocious than anything up until then. So people worry about the increase in the ferocity of it and the destruction of it. Distancing humans from it also is like, who becomes responsible for things? If you have an autonomous weapon that's deployed in some battle space of some kind, and let's say it has a particular target, right? So you have, this diffusion of responsibility goes something like this. You have this weapon, it's going after, let's say, target Z, right? So once you put the autonomous weapon and it goes after target Z, what if there is no Z? Then it goes after, let's say, target T. So, but it wasn't necessarily programmed. This is independent. There's your independent decision. So the whole background here, right, of all the people that are involved, that built it, the programmers, etc., etc., it's not hard to think of their relationship via the autonomous weapon to Z, but what's their relationship along this route? How are they responsible, right? How does that work? Once you've got, and we have this in every day. How, we have arbitrary cutoffs. You're responsible for your children when they're really, really young. If your 5-year-old does something, you can be held responsible for it. 6-year-old, 7-year-old, and then eventually they hit a certain age, and as a parent, you're no longer responsible. So we just stipulate that in the law, right? What are we going to do here? Are we going to say, oh well, okay, we'll just stipulate it that if it destroys what it was intended originally by the people, the programmers, the builders, etc., companies, governments, whatever, then there is a sense of responsibility. But if it's down here, not so much. Yeah, okay, but I mean that seems to be questionable. What if T is a lot like Z? Does it matter? And then you can get into those kinds of discussions. Well, T is pretty well not that particular Z, not that particular building, but a building right next to it, something like that. So it's not all that different. So is it really an independent decision? So you can get into these problems of responsibility. And also, once autonomous weapons become very sophisticated, well, no doubt as they say in the military, the ratio of the teeth to tail, right? This is going to get much larger. So how are the people, even if you do have a more direct link like the AW to Z link regarding responsibility, how are the individuals in these actually related, right? What if there's committees and a variety of things? And when people get in groups and make group decisions or group actions, everyone says, well, nobody on the committee exactly wanted that particular result, but it was the result of the voting. How many times do people get elected into office because they're quote unquote a compromise candidate? They weren't anybody's favorite. So who's responsible now? So you've got these kinds of issues, and you can see how if there's a diffusion of responsibility and people are like, well, it's not really my fault. People are going to slide over here. They're going to become morally disengaged, right? It's not, well, I'm only one vote in the system. It's not my responsibility what exactly happens to the autonomous, what happens as a result of the quote unquote the decisions of the autonomous weaponry. So in that sense, we're probably increasing the likelihood, so goes the people who argue from this line, that you're going to get even nastier forms of killing. And again, we're also removing humans further away through this video gaming, distancing them, diffusing them. We're removing humans from the place, and our natural, what some people argue, now there's some debate about how real this is, but some people say, look, humans don't like killing each other. That's why you have to have training. That's why humans naturally don't go and kill. We get a little mad at each other, but we don't really want to kill each other all the time. And we have to be trained to do that. Well, you're removing us from all this. And so if it's easier to press a button if you can press a button and kill, you're more likely to do that than if you have to kill face to face. And so you could actually turn people into bigger killers than they would otherwise be. So you mediate the killing and the person doing the killing through a bunch of technology. You've got that again. They've got that moral disengagement and the natural proclivities. There are what some argue they are. They're largely swept away. So people can become more comfortable with the whole thing because they're really not killing. I don't see it. I'm just pushing a button here. So this. War could spiral out of control and ferocity. It's not going to go and become more moral or more humane. It's going to be the opposite. Now somebody might, well, what about just putting that natural, empathetic, or reluctance to kill proclivity in a machine? Well, we've seen Searle as saying you can't do that, right? These systems, they might be able to play fantastic games of chess. They might be able to do all kinds of things, but just programming a machine, it's not going to be empathetic, right? You could maybe program it where it doesn't kill people or something like that. But again, with targets and all that, it's going to make decisions, unless you put something in then that is absolutely, never kill humans. Is it really autonomous anymore? Because we say to our soldiers, well, sometimes you got to kill and you got to do these things. You got to make judgments. So you could just say, well, okay, that's going to put the brakes on the autonomy of the system. So you're not really having autonomous weapons. They might have to be programmed very concretely or very with limits. And then you're back in maybe that problem that we saw earlier between if they're programmed too restrictively, then they're kind of useless. So it's not really autonomous weaponry anymore. So in that sense, you can't. You just humans will just be better. If Searle is right that it's very unlikely that you're going to program a computer. He doesn't say that you can't get what we value in human tendencies in a machine per se, but you're not going to program that in. So if it's just the symbolic, if it's just shall we say, a formal manipulation of symbols in your artificial intelligence that's embedded into your autonomous weaponry system, you're not going to get empathy out of the deal. It just doesn't work that way. So we'd have have to take a much different approach to the autonomous weaponry. All right, so this is kind of an argument that ultimately a lot of people who push this line are just saying, look, machines are just not us. So they take a stronger line than somebody like Searle would. And they say, you'll just never get empathy and you'll just never get a machine that can handle warfare the way a human mind can, no matter what. And that might be true. That argument is still one that is open. But again, it's going to take more than just, some of Searle's reasoning to get that one off the ground. Also that as you disengage human beings from the military, well, the military values will degrade. There will no longer be any sense to a fair fight, right? Centering robots, countries will just send whatever they can out on the field. There won't be any, there will be basically no restrictions, and it will just escalate. Military skills will suffer degradation. Soldiers will be sidelined by technical experts. And instead of soldiers that we normally think of as highly skilled and trained human beings that are proficient at operating weaponry or whatever, it might look more like a group of computer programmers. That's fine. I mean, that in principle you might say, well, so what? But again, this is an argument that does link up with the history and the honor of serving in militaries and defense and all that. But maybe that's going to change. But the people who are against it, they're marshaling a variety of arguments that this is going to be the degradation of a once noble institution, is to basically automate it. All right. Some people say also the argument against it is that this is going to lead to just incredible micromanagement, right? That all skills that involve anything that computers and things can't do will be increasingly concentrated in a small group of people at the very top, and they will micromanage the entire system. And so everything, you'll get that, Rossum's universal robots kind of thing is just, one or two humans way at the top, and everything else will be fully automated, and the people way at the top will just have this panopticon kind of vision of the whole situation. You're in sort of a George Orwell 1984 scenario of ultimate micromanagement. And is that really compatible? Like, what kind of a military, if it was like that, this sort of Orwellian kind of military, not that Orwell would have liked it, but Orwellian in the sense of Orwell would have hated it. If you have that kind of structure, how would the military like that, where people are so used to being complete overlords of everything, how would that kind of structure fit into a democracy, right? Would that work well? Because in democracies, we civilian oversight, and the person that's in charge of defense is ultimately a civilian that's been elected by people. Would that have a tendency to subvert that kind of power structure that liberal democracies have embraced? So it could be a bigger threat to the notion of civilian control if it's automated. Maybe Searle is wrong, and we can really start talking about, a programmed robotic kind of consciousness. But maybe eventually, some say, well, counter all this is we're going to have to talk about rights for robots and whatnot. All right. So, but in the end, the robot question warfare, raises a bigger and interesting and ancient ethical issue. And it's always been, it's been regarded that humans shouldn't play God or shouldn't mess around with everything. There's things we shouldn't know, et cetera, et cetera. We can reframe this issue of sort of forbidden knowledge or the forbidden in a different way. Of course, knowing how to do something doesn't mean you should, right? Knowing that doesn't entail should do that. But you can ask yourself, is it likely? It's probably likely the case. First off, let's start with this. It's likely the case that all this stuff can be automated, right? The history is showing that as you just keep going, stuff that people thought would never be automated has been automated. People thought, yeah, you'll make a good chess playing program, but you'll never beat the grandmasters. Well, that's done. But for some reason, even though the best chess computers can beat the grandmasters, why are we not all sitting around watching the highest form and in one sense the best chess playing on the planet right now would be supercomputers squaring off? We're not watching that, right? Maybe we don't want that automated. Certain technologically advanced products do fail. We reject them. But think about this, is there something in principle that should not be automated? And is it the case that, just if you can automate it, then you should? But is there something in the end that should not be automated? And maybe the fears of automation are just temporal fears. One time people were worried about power looms and they went off and destroyed the power looms. But nonetheless, it's still a living and existential question. Is it okay? Is it a wise idea to automate everything?